Hello all, welcome to OMSI's Virtual Science Pub. I'll be your host tonight. My name is Sean Rooney. I'm also the Life Sciences Coordinator here at OMSI. Before we get started with tonight's virtual event, I have a couple things to tell you about what's going on at OMSI these days, such as OMSI's open, hooray! Our current exhibit, Dinosaurs Revealed, is open all the way through until September 6th. And in the exhibit, there's animated dinosaurs, some cool replica fossils, including full replica, full skeletons. Advanced tickets are highly recommended. It does sell out from time to time. While you're here, you can also catch our planetarium. Our theater's also open. We have the sub-tours that are open as well. Go ahead and check out the website to get more information and also up-to-date information on COVID safety guidelines. I hope you had enjoyed the pre-pub trivia and the music from local Portland artist Trinetti. It's good grooves, good tunes. And just so we all know, putting on these shows does take a lot of work, and that we have an amazing partner that has been making this happen for us for a while now. So a big thank you and shout out to Celestream for helping to provide the live streaming services for tonight's Science Pub and past Science Pubs too. Thank you. We appreciate their support. Let's see. We have other events coming up. A virtual hybrid style OMSI After Dark. We're partnering with a long-term partner, McMenamins, to host this. Guests can purchase a ticket at to one of 6 McMenamins locations in one of the theaters. You get a tasting beer or cider tray and some event goodies and access to the live streamed event. So you get to sit and watch with the live audience. Tickets are $25 and available on their website. Go ahead and check it out. We also encourage you to put the pub back in the Science Pub and check out all these great partners. Lots of good food and drinks out there. They've been partners with us, and you can order some things for them and help support the program. And you may be new to our Science Pub, and so I'm going to go over what our schedule is like. And even if you've been a reoccurring visitor to these, tonight's going to be maybe a little bit different. So we start with a trivia game, and then after that, we have a short, about a 30-minute or so lecture from both past and present executive directors of Lake County Resources Initiative. Following the lecture is about a 30-minute award-winning documentary about the impacts of a changing climate on rural Eastern Oregon. And then after the documentary, we will take your questions. So you can submit them at any point during the event. Use comments on Facebook or YouTube, and we will hold on to those and ask the guests when we're back on and all together. So also, if you enjoy tonight's lecture, please consider making a donation to OMSI or purchasing a Science Pub pint glass. I don't have one around me, but they are really cool. We do have one at home. I really like them. But don't worry, there's no pressure to donate. Our mission at OMSI is to inspire curiosity by creating engaging science learning experiences for people of all ages and backgrounds. So sit back, get ready for a fun event. Like I said, we're going to start with trivia. And this week, we have a guest who's going to be joining along and playing trivia with you. Our guest tonight is the Director of Guest Engagement at OMSI, Andrew Haight. Let's give a welcome to Andrew. Hey, Andrew, welcome aboard.
Hey, Sean, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. What are you curious about for tonight's lecture? Anything you're looking forward to?
Oh gosh, good question. I think the thing that's on so many of our minds right now as it relates to climate change and what's going on around the state is forest fires. Yeah, I feel like that is something that I'm really curious about and want to learn more about.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Same here. Well, it looks like you're ready for trivia, Andrew. Everyone else out there in the virtual world, so at home, maybe you grab some pen and paper. You can write down your answers to this. Challenge the people in your room, see who can get the most, and maybe I can make a little bet out of it, and someone gets extra chores or someone gets extra massages or whatever it might be. So, Andrew, let's start with the first question. Question 1. What is the population density of Lake County? So our guest that would be speaking to, or that will be speaking later, is from Lake County. What is the population density of Lake County? Is it one, or A, is it 1 person per square mile? B, 5 people per square mile? C, 20 people per square mile? Or D, 200 people per square mile?
So Lake County is big, but it's not the biggest county. It's not like Harney County, I don't think. I don't think there are a lot of people out there, but I don't think it's as few as 1. I'm going to go C, 20 people per square mile.
Okay.
I think it's either B or C, but I'm going to go C.
Okay, sounds good, sounds good. I like your logic there, thinking about sizes of counties and all that. And let's see what we got. The answer is A, 1 person per square mile. Yeah, wow. I was surprised by that fact as well. Yeah.
All right, 0 for 1.
Yeah. To give you a little bit of perspective here, OMSI's in Multnomah County. We have about 1,600 people per square mile. Just a difference in population density throughout our region. And Oregon is interesting in that there's a lot of variation all throughout the state. Okay. Next question 2. What is the greatest source of renewable energy in Lake County currently? The greatest source of renewable energy in Lake County. Is it A, wind energy? B, residential solar? C, utility solar? Or D, biomass? Greatest source.
Yeah, I'm gonna go A, wind energy.
A, wind energy. Okay. Well, let's see. It is utility solar. Yeah. I hope you get to learn about that. I wasn't quite sure either. I was thinking maybe biomass, but I wasn't really sure.
Yeah, I guess there's a whole lot of sunshine out there year round, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
More about like I guess I was thinking further north, right? In the gorge and that whole I-84 stretch where you see so much wind energy. But I guess further south, it's more about the solar energy.
Yeah, yep, quite a bit.
Yeah.
All right, keep some of those thoughts in mind for future questions.
Okay.
All right, question 3. What amount, speaking of wind energy, question 3, what amount of cash does each resident in Sherman County receive every year thanks to tax revenues from wind turbines? Is it A, 150, B, 590, C, 2,500, or D, $5,090?
Let's see. If it's like it seems like it's going to be a sort of a wrap. I mean, I don't know, 590, there's something odd about that number, right? It just sort of sticks out from the rest.
Good point.
So that has my interest. 5,090 seems like too much, but then again, I thought 1 per square mile was too little. So this is a different county, so maybe there are more people in Sherman. Man, I'm guessing now. This is going to be a straight up guess. And I'm going to say D, $5,090. Okay.
I appreciate your logic though, even though you said it's kind of a wild guess. You still pulled in some prior knowledge and even some test taking skills of looking at
it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle, right?
That's right. Well, it was B, 590, that odd number. Yeah.
Should have gone with my instinct.
Yeah, sometimes science and logic is good, and sometimes intuition's good, I guess. Question 4. Why did the Lakeview Stewardship Group first form? So why did the Lakeview Stewardship Group first form? Is it A, to create a national park, B, to save the one remaining lumber mill and implement sustainable forestry practices, C, to create a biomass plant that would utilize material from forest restoration projects, or D, to attract utility scale solar that would generate tax revenue?
Well, we know from 2 of the previous questions that D happened somewhere along the line. We don't know if, right, because utility scale solar was the big producer and there's a fair amount of tax revenue coming in. So that could be the case. B also seems interesting, but I'm not sure about the amount of lumber that's coming from that part of the state. Biomass plant that would utilize material from forest restoration projects. I think because of the previous 2 questions, I'm gonna go B actually. I'm gonna go save the one remaining lumber mill and implement sustainable forestry practice. I'm gonna go B.
And you are correct.
Hey, finally!
Yes, yep. So B, to save the one remaining lumber mill and implement sustainable forestry practices. That's great. Nice. Might have gave you an answer a little bit, moving ahead too fast. But question 5, how is Lakeview's hospital heated? How is Lakeview's hospital heated? A, with a biomass boiler, B, with geothermal energy, C, with solar generated electricity, or D, with a gas powered furnace?
I think either A or C, because I feel like biomass keeps showing up, so it's got to be here for a reason. But we've talked a lot about all the solar. I'm going to go solar generated electricity, C.
Okay, well, let's find out. It's geothermal energy. Geothermal energy. But you're right. There is quite a trend here, Andrew, isn't there? Like just diverse energy sources, I guess. Yeah,
it's cool.
Let's go to another question. Question 6. Which is a threat to Eastern Oregon's rural communities today? Is it A, catastrophic wildfires, which I think you mentioned earlier, B, economic stagnation, C, water security, or D, all of the above?
I think it's all of the above, D. That would be my instinct. That would be my guess.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. You are correct. D, all of the above. Catastrophic wildfires, economic stagnation, and water security are all threats to Eastern Oregon rural communities. Lots of,
yeah.
Lots of
probably
tough
not the whole list. That's a threat to Eastern Oregon too at this point.
Say that again?
It's probably not the whole list of all the threats out there too, right?
That's right. Yeah. So it seems like quite a bit of work. I look forward to hearing more about strategies of resiliency.
Definitely.
Okay. Let's look at question 7. Sunny days. How many sunny days does Lake County experience annually on average? How many sunny days does Lake County experience annually on average? Is it A, 100, B, 215, C, 300, or D, all year round, 365?
Well, based on the amount of solar energy they're producing, I'm going to go C, 300.
Okay.
365, that seems a little too aggressive.
Yeah. I think their population would probably be much higher than 1 person per square mile if they got that many sunny days. Everyone would go. Well, it's 215. 215, B, which is still higher, much higher than the Oregon average is 175. But yeah, a lot of those counties in the south, especially, get a lot more sunny days than we do up here.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and U.S. average is about 205. So they get more than the U.S. average. So much for rainy Oregon. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Question 8. Which does integrated biomass resources, now called heartwood biomass, in Wallowa County, not produce? So in Wallowa County, there's heartwood biomass. And which of these do they not produce? A, firewood, B, posts and poles, C, wood chips, or D, large dimension lumber?
That's tough. So I'm going to say, I feel like everybody produces firewood. Posts and poles seems like really specific, and like for pole barns and those kinds of things. Wood chips, large dimension lumber. I'm gonna say D, large dimension lumber. It's gonna be my guess.
You would be correct. Large dimension, yeah. Is there a reason you were thinking that?
Well, I feel like that part of the state deals more in like smaller junipers and those types of trees rather than out here on the eastern side of the state where we've got the big firs and larger conifers.
Gotcha. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so no large dimension lumber there. Well, let's see. There's 2 more questions. And question 9 is heading back to Lake County. So Lake County, Oregon is named after the many lakes found within its boundaries. How many lakes are there, whole or part? A, are there 8? B, 11. C, 16, or D, 27?
This is a total guess, but I'm gonna say it's a big county and it's got a lot of lakes clearly by the name, so it's probably either 16 or 27. I'm gonna say C, 16.
Okay. Oh, 27. 27.
All those lakes.
That is a lot of lakes.
A lot of lakes.
Yes, some good names for these.
Mugwump. I want Mugwump. I want to find out what Mugwump Lake is.
Yeah. Whole groups of lakes. Yeah, really neat lakes. Huh.
That's good.
I'm not sure. I'm kind of.
We talked about lakes today.
Oh, you got another partner with you.
Here. He's peeking over the shoulder, checking out the lakes too.
Oh, he talked about lakes today. He might have known how many lakes were in Lake County.
Yeah.
Phone
a friend.
Yeah. Okay, last question. What natural attraction is found in Lake County? So is it A, Paisley Caves, B, Lava Beds National Monument, C, Crater Lake National Park, or D, Mount Bachelor?
Okay, so I can rule out C and D. Don't actually know where Paisley Caves are. And I feel like lava beds are further north. I'm going to go A.
Okay.
I'm going to go A, Paisley Caves.
You are correct. Paisley Caves. It's
cool.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, really neat archaeology site. Yes, especially for like human history and stuff. Well, did you tally it up? I didn't tally up yours. How'd you do?
Well, I didn't pass, I don't think, Sean. I think I got more studying.
Okay. Gotta, some more Oregon history and geology.
Yeah, gotta brush up.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Andrew, for joining. I hope it was fun anyway. I learned something. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully everyone else out there learned something. Thanks for joining, Andrew. Everyone give Andrew a round of applause.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, thanks. And, well, that does it for our trivia, everyone. Excuse me. And now what we're going to do is move on. And we have tell you about our guests. We have two guests, as I said before. We have two guests that are going to be joining us. Our first guest, well, they'll be joining at the same time, but our first guest is Jim Walls, founding and past executive director and current board chair of Lake County Resources Initiative. And after a 22-year career with NRCS, working with agriculture producers in the Midwest, Jim was asked to move back to the place he grew up, Lakeview, Oregon, and assist in the community that was facing and overcoming the detrimental economic impacts resulting from the downturn of the timber industry. Jim worked in partnership with Sustainable Northwest and Lake County commissioners to form Lake County Resources Initiative, LCRI, in 2002 to facilitate the Lakeview Stewardship Group Forest Collaborative, a group that brought together community members, environmental stakeholders, timber companies, and agency representatives to develop federal forest management strategies that meets the needs of all. A few years later, Jim looked to renewable energy as an opportunity to start backfilling the hole in the economy left by the downturn of the timber industry, and in the process paved a new path forward for rural communities that provided social, economic, and ecological benefits, also known as the triple bottom line. Jim continued in his role as executive director of Lake County Resources Initiative until 2018. But his involvement with the organization and work to build a sustainable Lake County didn't stop there. Jim continues to be involved in the community, and shortly after his retirement, joined LCRI's board of directors and is currently the chair of LCRI's board. Also joining us is Nick Johnson, executive director, or the current executive director, I should say, of Lake County Resources Initiative. Nick was born and raised in Eastern Oregon and joined LCRI at the start of 2018 through the Rare AmeriCorps program after working for a couple of years in the wood products industry following his graduation from college. After Jim's retirement, Nick transitioned into the position of executive director of LCRI. Nick continues to build from the progress made by Jim and others and stays true to LCRI's original purpose. Nick has also expanded the organization's scope through programs that provide renewable energy, project development assistance to rural business owners, and other program areas. So, everyone, let's say hello and welcome to Nick and Jim. Nick and Jim, go ahead and take it away.
Well, this is Jim, and that was a pretty good introduction there. I think I should just say it's the old man and the kid that's presenting today. But glad to be here, and you had a good background of where I came from and as former director and stuff, so I have nothing more to add to that.
Yeah, and, I'm Nick Johnson, the current executive director of LCRI, and thanks for this opportunity to be here. And we extend a thank you to OMSI and everybody who's watching today.
A little bit about my background and stuff. You know, I did a career with, back then, this ages me, the Soil Conservation Service, now the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and I did that in the Midwest and got to help farmers out there do soil conservation work. And that's where I got a great background in the environment and the work that I did. But I always missed the open spaces and the federal lands and where I grew up and running cattle in the mountains and doing that kind of thing. So I wanted to return home, and through NRCS, I went to the state of Washington as a resource conservation and development director, which was a federal program running a nonprofit. And that gave me a lot of background in nonprofits and raising funds.
So, Jim, do you want to do an intro of what Lake County Resources Initiative is?
Yeah, Lake County Resources Initiative. Jane O'Keefe, the county commissioner back then, and we had 5 sawmills and all but one had closed. And they were worried about the last one closing. So she got a hold of Sustainable Northwest and said, we need help and make sure that doesn't happen. So Martin Goebel of Sustainable Northwest, who had worked with in the forestry issue over on the coast of Washington through the RC&D program, got to know him, said, would you like to come back to Lake County? And I said, I would love to do that and start this collaborative and work with the environmental group in the industry, the one last remaining sawmill, Collins Companies, and see if we can't come to mutual agreements on management of the forest. And we did that and created Lcri as a nonprofit to carry on that work. And so that's where we started, was doing that type of work in forestry and stuff, and trying to save that sawmill, which we did.
Yeah, and as we saw a little bit during those trivia questions, Lake County is a very rural county, and we're about 100 miles from the closest stoplight. So we're way out here, and we have a very low population. And the primary economic drivers in this county are agricultural-based businesses. So, timber, cattle, and farming are really the main economic drivers here. So when Jim is talking about how 5 of the 6 sawmills in the county closed down, it's really hard to overstate the severe economic impact that had on this community. And the work that Jim did to form the Lakeview Stewardship Collaborative and bring environmental stakeholders and industry folks and agency folks all together was very innovative and forward-thinking at the time. It's pretty common practice now, but Jim was really a leader in paving the way in that type of collaborative forest management. So you want to share that?
And as we were working through the forestry collaborative and working with the many environmental groups, Wilderness Society, Defenders of Wildlife, Nature Conservancy, and the Sawmill, and we're going to a more small diameter of thinning and reducing fire threat type of sawmill. In fact, after we got agreements on everything, the sawmill invested in a small diameter new sawmill and put it in. But we thought about all these residuals that we had left over from doing these thinnings, and we had a lot of geothermal. We still have a lot of geothermal in Lake County. And so we started thinking about what could we use those residuals for rather than just piling them in slash piles and lighting a match to them. And that came up with the idea of biomass. And so we started thinking about renewables and biomass and geothermal, and we developed a plan for the county and we branded ourselves Oregon's most renewable energy county. And that caught on all through the state agencies and throughout. And to our surprise, I would like to say we planned all this out to the nth degree, but we didn't. All of a sudden, solar caught on and started moving here. We had a biomass plant being built, but due to some complications, it didn't get finished. So solar started coming, and it came in a big way and made a big difference.
Yeah. And solar really acted as a mechanism to drive the economy after the downturn of the timber industry. Back when it all started, each of the projects that we host were generating around $7,000 per megawatt per year. And I think today that brings in over $1 million of county tax revenue annually. And that's no small thing in an isolated and rural community like Lake County. So renewable energy has really been used as an economic development tool here, as well as a tool to promote sustainable development, I suppose. But yeah, Jim, do you want to talk about the transition and what caused you to step away from LCRI?
Well, stepping away from LCRI could have been mostly age, but it wasn't. I was up in my late 60s, and due to some circumstances, had some medical problems, brain bleeds. And then in less than 1 year, I had 3 brain operations, and the surgeons discovered my dad was right. It was mostly hot air up there. So, but anyway, that put me, and I lost a lot of memory through that. And that I started making some mistakes I wouldn't have normally made because everything wasn't straight in my head. It's better today, but it wasn't right at that moment. And I decided with age and the medical problems, I should step away.
Yeah. And before I came to LCRI, I was working up in Central Oregon as a wood products engineer, and I was looking for a career change at the time. And my brother was living here in Lakeview, and I heard from him that there was an opportunity to work with this guy named Jim Walls. And he didn't really expand beyond that. He said his name's Jim and he works in renewable energy, and I was interested in that. So I reached out to Jim one day, and Jim shared with me that the placement at LCRI was through what's called the Rare AmeriCorps program, which is a Resource Assistance for Rural Environments AmeriCorps program housed at the University of Oregon. And that program takes graduate level students and places them in rural communities across the state to add capacity and resources to organizations like LCRI or other community organizations. So I kind of made a career change and decided to serve for a year through the Rare AmeriCorps program. And I think it was really only just a couple months into my service year that Jim started having his health issues. And, one day Jim wasn't able to come to work and said, "Nick, you gotta take care of things now." So that was a bit shocking. And it was quite the steep learning curve. And everybody that I talked to said I had big shoes to fill, and no doubt they were right. I still have big shoes to fill. But it was an abrupt and tough transition, and there was a lot to learn. But I love working with LCRI now, and I'm very happy that I'm down here in Lake County today. But to share a little bit about what LCRI is doing today, so we still are the facilitator and the convener of the Lakeview Stewardship Group Forest Collaborative. We have annual field tours. In fact, we just had our field tour last month for a proposed project here on the National Forest, and it went very positively. We had great turnout. Another one of the foundational programs that really started at the beginning of LCRI is called the Can Biophysical Monitoring Team, or the CBMT. And that program is a group of youth who we employ seasonally during the summers, and their job is to actually go out and collect forest health data on the National Forest and see how the projects that are being planned by the collaborative, if they're meeting their desired outcomes. So they're collecting that information and informing the collaborative about their management strategies on the National Forest. It's a great way to involve youth, and it's just a very informative and great program. Beyond that, we still work in renewable energy today, and Jim's major focus when he was here was utility scale solar development as a tool to strengthen and stabilize the economy here, which it most certainly has done. It's met that objective. While we still work in utility scale development today, we're focusing more on issues around sustainable land use, keeping projects off of irrigated ag land, and trying to mitigate any impacts to other parts of the ecosystem like wildlife, or even potential impacts to communities. So we're pretty involved on the siting end of things here in Lake County, because Lake County is really a very desirable place to build solar. In fact, we actually have either the biggest or the second biggest project in the United States in the planning and development phase right now. It's actually the 5th largest project in the world, which is pretty exciting. That'll be up in the north part of Lake County, and it'll be up to 800 megawatts potentially. So that's very exciting. But beyond that utility scale solar development, we're also supporting the local economy by assisting local businesses, local ranchers, and local farmers with implementing and using renewable energy in their operations. For example, in ranches, that may be putting off-grid stock water tanks. For farms, that may be building solar arrays to offset energy demand from irrigation systems. And then for commercial businesses, of course, we have things like rooftop solar, and then just general efficiency for those operations as well, switching to LED lights and various things like that. We support those changes and that efficiency work by finding the incentives that are out there offered both federally and at a state level through programs with the USDA, through programs with Energy Trust of Oregon, and stacking those incentives to make renewable energy and energy efficiency upgrades available to everybody, because there most certainly is a cost barrier sometimes, but we're addressing that by stacking those incentives. And those are active programs today, and we do those not only in Lake County, but across the entire state as well. Let's see what else here. So next we wanted to talk a little bit about climate change and the role, I guess, that LCRI plays in mitigating the impacts of climate change.
And climate change, as we were looking at doing renewable energy as an economic development tool, we started thinking about what impacts could we have on climate change. So LCRI hired a couple of college students to help us design a climate change plan, which the county commissioners, the mayor of Paisley, the mayor of Lakeview, all adopted. And it was on the abiotic side, because that's where fossil fuels are in the ground and come from. And we looked at it and we go, wow, we think we can make offset 93% of all of that. Well, now today, as we progress through time and with Nick's efforts and everything, it looks like we're going to be able to do better. And Nick's going to show you some of that. I will say before he starts, though, he says those were hard shoes to fill. He's more than filled them. It's so gratifying to have somebody so capable take over when you have to leave. And that's been gratifying. And I thank you for that.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. Before we dive into some of this data that we've collected and had put together, I wanted to provide a little bit of background about some of the images that are on this slide and why I selected these images. So on the left part of your screen there, you can see the hillside that in 1890 was almost barren, and the picture below it in 1989, which almost just covered completely in juniper. And that's actually a picture that was taken up in Prineville, which is just east of Bend, a little ways, northeast of Bend. And at the top, you see that barren landscape, and barren may not be the best word for that, but ultimately that was pre-fire suppression. So fire in Eastern Oregon plays a very critical role in ecosystem health. The climate around here and the ecosystems are adapted to having frequent low-intensity fire on rotations from every 5 to 15 years or 5 to 20 years. And when you had those frequent fire rotations, they managed the land and kept it in balance. So, for example, that picture at the bottom of this slide shows what a low severity or natural fire would have looked like. And this is actually a picture of a prescribed fire, which is a tool that's being used very frequently to manage Eastern Oregon forests after active management takes place. It's very important to do this to essentially give this ecosystem what it has adapted to and what it needs to thrive. The background in this slide shows a catastrophic wildfire and what you don't want. There's a distinct separation between catastrophic wildfire and low intensity healthy fire, so to speak. And if you look back at that picture on the top left there, you can see if a fire were to go through that, it would be low. It would just creep and crawl through there and do its job. But in that lower picture in 1989, if you had a fire in that area, you would have an explosive catastrophic fire. And that's really what we're seeing in Oregon, and we have been seeing for the past couple of years now. Already in Lake County, I think we've had 6 or 7 wildfires this year. In fact, there were 2 that have flared up today that are quite severe. So we're in fire season, and they declared fire season in June this year, which is pretty unprecedented and not natural. But the other point that I wanted to make, and why I included the picture on the right of the solar panels, is that renewable energy plays a role, and it's a tool in the toolbox for mitigating the impacts of climate change and mitigating climate change itself. There are other things that need to happen and work in tandem. You can't just have one or the other, and renewable energy is not a silver bullet, and it's not right for every application, but it certainly has a lot of benefits. And working hand in hand with responsible forest and land management provides greater opportunities to have a measurable and real impact on mitigating climate change. So moving on to a little bit of this data and what Jim was alluding to earlier. We had a study done at LCRI back in 2012 that was fairly informal that tried to take an inventory of the county's greenhouse gas emissions, as well as sinks and avoidance sources such as renewable energy projects. And it was a great study, and there was some great information taken out of that. But we thought there was opportunity to improve. And last year, we received some funding through a foundation here in Oregon to commission Oregon Institute of Technology to essentially rework this study. And it's a very innovative, great study. And it's actually nearly completed. Well, the study is completed, and it's in the peer review process right now. And I think actually it's supposed to be formally done with the peer review process at the end of this week, and then will be a published study. And I just also wanted to note that we have some funding to print out about 125 hard copies of this study. So if anybody's interested in receiving a hard copy, you just have to reach out to us and we'll get one of those in the mail for you. And when it's finished, it'll also be digitally available as well. But we're extremely pleased with the outcomes of this study, and it's very thorough. And it's our hope that other counties across the state will take a similar approach. So that way we're kind of weighing apples to apples on a statewide level. And really making informed decisions when it comes to putting our money and our energy and our efforts towards our largest emitting sources to really work to reduce those. By having this study in hand now, we know as a county what our largest emission sources are. We know where our energy and our time and our efforts need to go. So I included just a couple of the graphs that are in this study to look at. I think the total study is about 90 pages, so we really aren't able to cover much here today, but it's very interesting. And this first graph here shows a percentage of greenhouse gas emissions attributed to each sector. And you'll see that agriculture, is the largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, but likely probably not for the reason that you would think. So moving on to the next slide here. Let's see here. Might have gone out of order. This graph shows another breakdown, essentially by sector. And again, agriculture is the highest greenhouse gas emitting sector in our economy. But if you look at forestry and renewable energy, forestry activities here, which it was interesting during the trivia, we talked about this a little bit, but the Fremont-Wainema Forest, which is a national forest in Lake and Klamath counties, actually produces the most timber on the eastern side of Oregon, and we have a pretty high volume of timber harvest here. But again, alluding back to what Jim said, we're doing that sustainably, and we're doing it from a science and data-based approach and through a collaborative approach. But forestry activities, including harvest, actually sequesters 70,000 megatons per year, as well as renewable energy. That's another one of our largest offset or avoidance efforts. And let's see here. So this is a breakdown of just the agricultural emissions, which is pretty interesting to look at. So you can see all the way on the right that non-alfalfa hay production actually sequesters carbon, and that's happening through carbon capture in soil, capture and storage in soil. Alfalfa production is minimal emissions, and manure management is also very minimal. But if you look on the far left there, enteric fermentation is actually our largest source of emissions in the entire county across all industries. And what enteric fermentation is essentially cow burps, which is kind of amusing. But cows, as they're digesting food, they generate methane in their guts and they burp that back out. And that is actually our largest greenhouse gas emission source, which is pretty fascinating. But it's also important to know that cattle production is our largest economic driver. And as a county, we account for less than 1% of the total emissions for the entire state. And frankly, if cow burps are our biggest concern, I think we're doing pretty darn well.
It's also probably important to state, too, as you look at the science of climate change, methane from animals, whether it be cows or whatever, it's the below ground, it's the coal, oil that's been stored in the earth that is causing climate change rapidly. Before cattle, there was millions of heads of buffalo and others also doing the same process. So you need to separate the abiotic from the biotic production and concentrate on what's really causing climate change.
Yep, that's a very important point to make. Absolutely. And then our last graph here kind of breaks down what's called like the carbon flux through forestry activities. So in this graph, it's kind of opposite of these other ones. All of these negative numbers represent actually emission sources. So you're having carbon emitted through the decay of down and dead trees, through natural mortality, just mortality of trees and underbrush and grasses and forbs and so on and so forth. And you look all the way over at the left at gross growth. So that's really how we're sequestering and storing most of the carbon related to forestry activities. And the last point that we kind of wanted to talk about was really the urban-rural divide and opportunities associated with building bridges.
And I think it's important to note in our plan that we did, the climate change plan, that we'd offset 93% of the abiotic emissions. We've already offset over 100% of that.
Yeah,
and we did that economically. But urban areas can't do it all economically. But the small diameter material, you can put it into a wood product called cross-laminated timber, and you can build up to 14-story buildings out of that, replacing steel and concrete, offsetting tremendous amounts of carbon emissions. And so we can work together, the urban and the rural areas, to help solve this problem, because we do have more room for more infrastructure to help offset the emissions in the urban areas. And the film, Other Side of the Hill, has done that connection in a lot of ways. I'm on some boards on climate change with Western Oregon people that would have never ever happened, because we had this vision, I think, of people have visions of different parts of the state of who we are and who we aren't. And I think the film helps. I hope you see that in the film, that we have a lot more in common, and we can help each other.
Absolutely. And I wanted to expand on one of the points that Jim made about cross-laminated timber. Not only are you storing carbon through the use of engineered wood products like that and replacing steel and concrete, which are very emission intensive in their manufacturing and use, but when you're generating those engineered wood products, and you are actually sourcing that material in a way that improves the health of the ecosystem and the landscapes and the forests, there's the benefit there as well. And a lot of people like to talk about the carbon capture that's happening in trees, which is awesome, and I think that's great. But there's a far greater opportunity to capture and store carbon in soils. And when you have forests that are stocked at the proper level, and by that, I mean, I've heard before from folks just different opinions that, like, when you look at a forest and the more trees you see, the healthier that forest is. And really that's not the case, particularly in Eastern Oregon. We have to remember that Eastern and Western Oregon are completely different ecosystems. And in Eastern Oregon, forests were sparse. They were, there was a lot of space between trees. They were open. There were lots of meadows, and that was beneficial for wildlife habitat, for the growth of, again, forbs, grasses, and shrubs, which really are one of the primary actions to sequester carbon in the soil. But sorry, anyways, a bit of a rant there. But I would fully agree with Jim and say that it's, there's not just an opportunity for rural and urban communities to work together. It's a necessity if we really want to have a meaningful impact on mitigating climate change. Urban communities have a lot of the resources that rural communities do not, and rural communities also have access to a lot of the resources that urban communities don't. And for example, that can be land, that can be fiber, and various other things. We've started conversations with a lot of urban Portland organizations like Verde, looking at hosting a project down here in Lake County for some of the environmental justice communities up in Portland. And building and forging those relationships is really a necessity to make progress. Climate change, it impacts all of us. It impacts, particularly rural communities and low-income communities disproportionately. But it doesn't care about your political affiliation or your religious affiliation. It impacts all of us, and we all need to really make a combined effort and see past our differences to find solutions to this issue that we're all facing.
And I think the important part of the Forest Collaborative was we hear a lot about Republican, Democrat today, liberal, conservative. Set all that aside and listen to each other and come together to find common ground. I think sometimes we're losing that ability to sit down and listen to each other respectfully. And that's what the collaboration on the forestry did for us.
Yeah, and it's not an easy thing to do either. You have to actively recognize your biases and make an active effort to not only, listen to another person, but really hear what they're saying. And it's tough sometimes. Jim and I know firsthand that it can be tough.
Oh yeah,
but it's again absolutely necessary.
Yes,
for progress. So, thank you guys for listening to our presentation here, and we hope that you enjoy the film.
And we're looking forward to some good questions.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, all. Welcome back. Welcome back, Nick and Jim. It was great to hear that and watch that documentary. That was, I really, really enjoyed it. So first question is going to come from me. If I want to share that with some friends and family, how do I find that? Besides, I guess, well, maybe I can just point them to this Science Pub and we can rewatch this. But is there another spot online or someplace that we can find that documentary? Yeah,
so there's a website. It's called othersideofthehillmovie.com, I think. But for screenings in this type of scenario, you can coordinate with the production team, and they'll get you access to the film to share and distribute.
As long as you agree not to do it on a public basis.
I think that's the case right now. I don't think it's publicly available quite yet, but will be in the future. Gotcha. Thanks. Yeah, I look forward to that. That was really, really awesome. I enjoyed that. Well, to everyone watching out there, there's just a reminder for asking questions. Go ahead and put it in the chat or the comments. Whatever one you're watching on, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, just add it to the comments and we'll make sure to add it to our list of questions for our hosts. So let's see, I have a list of questions here and we're just gonna get started. So let's see, one question, there's a couple questions about youth, the younger generation. And this question says, do you see the younger generation getting involved in farming, raising cattle, or in government in your area? Yeah, I think there's certainly a lot of the younger generation kind of transitioning into those operational management type positions. I see it pretty frequently. A good number of the youth that we employ on our biophysical monitoring team go on to study forestry and natural resources in college, and I think maybe like upwards of 70% of them have obtained master's degrees of some sort. But yeah, I think we're seeing that. I think that the youth and younger folks are certainly moving into those types of professions.
And I concur with that. Yes.
That's great. And there was another comment saying that they know that in some rural communities, in some rural counties, there's a loss of some of the population as they move out. Have you seen through your initiatives or similar initiatives more opportunity for folks to stay because of job creation and growing the economy?
One of the things that we were able to do was track Redrock Biofuels, and they take wood waste and create jet fuel, and they have a contract with the military, and it's under construction right now. They had an interim stop in construction. It's supposed to start up around September, October, and be online next year. That'll be 85 new jobs in this community. And then my wife is a realtor, and because of COVID, we're seeing more people move to rural areas.
Yeah, and to kind of build off what Jim is saying here, to put that in a little bit better perspective, one job in Lake County is proportional to approximately 550 jobs in Multnomah County. So one job is substantial. So when you talk about 85 jobs, I mean, that's a huge boost to the economy, no doubt. And really one of the things that attracted Redrock here was a biomass availability study that LCRI completed before I was here. That was one of Jim's efforts. And the other company that kind of worked with that, their project didn't pan out, and Redrock Biofuels got their hands on it and saw that this was a good place to build their business.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, thanks for that. And thanks for kind of putting it in the perspective for us folks in the city out here and what that looks like with the comparison of numbers. There was another question kind of in a similar vein, and you were talking about folks moving out to rural areas. In a documentary, there was a mention of refugees coming from California, and so the question says, do you see in your county folks from California that needed to move into the area, and have y'all seen a lot of that there?
Yeah, we actually have. We saw a lot of folks coming in from the Paradise Fire, actually. And I was speaking with one gentleman here locally who originally had been down in the south, and his home was destroyed by, I think, like Hurricane Katrina, or one of the larger hurricanes. He then moved to Paradise, and his house was again destroyed by the Paradise Fire there. And then he found himself in Lake County. So, a refugee crisis, it's a real thing that's happening. People are moving due to a changing and shifting climate.
Yeah, the movement of houses into the forest that needs to be thinned to get the fire reduction down and is causing people to move this way.
Yeah, and I think shifts in technology as well. Just through the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a large influx of folks into Lake County from the more populated areas like Bend, maybe. I think now that folks have the ability to work remotely, we're seeing more folks coming out into more rural areas. So there's a lot of factors, but not only environmental factors, but social factors as well. It's creating an influx in rural communities in rural Eastern Oregon.
Great, yeah, thanks. Speaking about the forests and kind of the overcrowded forest, there was a question here around water, and it says, let's see, all of the excess trees in the forest, especially the juniper, must also diminish the water table. Do you know of any studies that have been done to look at the impact of these dense forests on the water table?
Yeah. So I guess, sorry, I shouldn't have said yes. I can't call any studies out specifically to say yes, here's a study that you can go look at that specifically. But I know there has been research done on upland management and water tables in lowland areas. And, in our part of the state right now, we're in a very severe drought year. It's one of the worst droughts that there's ever been in Klamath and Lake counties. It's really, really bad. And I was up actually at a water users community meeting up in Christmas Valley, which is in the northern part of the county, and we looked at some well logs and the change in water tables for the past close to 80 years, and you can see it going pretty steady, and then all of a sudden in the 70s and 80s it really starts to taper off, and there could be numerous influences from that, but certainly something that's happening in the uplands is affecting water availability in the lowlands. And with that increased tree density, they use more resources. It's not just water, it's nutrients and other things as well. And those overcrowded forests don't have the ability to capture and store carbon as well as a balanced and properly managed forest.
Just on a personal side, I also believe that climate change, we're not seeing the snowpack high up in the mountains we used to get. I can remember not getting to where we ran cattle until, the end of May. I was up there in April this year, and that's been typical, getting up there earlier and earlier over a decade now.
We're seeing the changes, physically seeing them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, thanks for giving an idea of the historical, even in your lifetime, just seeing the historical difference in snowpack. Is that what? Is the snowpack, is that what feeds a lot of the lakes in Lake County, or what provides a lot of the water for the lakes?
A lot of snowpack for sure. There's certainly a large amount of springs as well. But this does tie back into the forestry and the timber issue. When you have stands of timber and forests that are properly managed at their historical range of variation, the land actually acts as a sponge for that snowpack. As it's melting, the land is absorbing that and then slowly releasing it through the growing season. When you have these overstocked forests, they're just consuming those resources, so it's just drying up, so you don't have that seasonal runoff over time that you would when you have a properly managed forest.
Gotcha. And that snowpack impacts the water table down below, like in Christmas Valley.
100%.
So that causes that impact down below. So it's a watershed deal.
Watershed, landscape scale, large scale, hundreds of thousands of acres.
Gotcha. Let's see. Going the other questions here. They're kind of a change in topics. It says, what has Lake County been able to do with the extra tax revenue from renewable energy projects?
I think it's hard to categorize it as extra tax revenue. Okay. Because we had so much loss from the downturn of the timber industry, and I most certainly, we're not back up at that level of tax revenues that were generated during the boom of the timber industry. So I think it's, I don't know if this is the case, but I almost feel like we still may be considered an economy that's in recession to some degree.
Yeah, and I think we haven't caught back up to those times in the taxes. So this is just a catch up without having to put new taxes on the people that still live here.
Yeah, that's helpful. A good perspective there. There is, speaking of which, there was a question: if people install solar or wind on their land or home, are there tax benefits? And is there tax benefits to, I guess, maybe the individual?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. There's accelerated depreciation on the purchase of equipment. So generally, like solar equipment will amortize over a 30-year amortization schedule. With accelerated depreciation, you can amortize it over 5 years, so you're showing increased expense and therefore have lower federal tax liability. And then there's also the investment tax credit, which is a dollar for dollar reduction in your federal tax liability. So yes, there are certainly benefits, and those benefits, when you start digging in and looking at those, a lot of times, or maybe not a lot of times, but sometimes those are actually more valuable than like the grant opportunities that are out there. That investment tax credit and accelerated depreciation are a huge financial benefit, and we strongly encourage folks to take advantage of those, and that's one of the incentives that we stack when we're assisting with projects.
Great, yeah. And thinking about this next question, I think kind of has to do with some of the topics that came up in a documentary, and thinking about bridging divides. And when you're looking to bridge divides, are there topics that you found that work really well to get the conversation moving forward, so it's not getting stuck on something that's just not working as well? Are there topics or strategies or things that you found that you find that is a good entry point?
What do you think, Jim?
Well, I think in facilitation, it's setting the ground rules that you're going to respectfully listen. Doesn't mean you have to agree, but you're going to listen to each other, and not necessarily just shout at each other and do that kind of thing, but you'll actually listen. And over time, what I found when a logger and an environmentalist is sitting there, in fact, my wife says the best discussions we had were around our fire pit in my backyard with a bottle of whiskey. But, and you get a logger and an environmentalist talking to each other, but respectfully doing it and not throwing punches. That I don't know how to put that in a context, but it's that respect. And to listen. You don't have to agree, but listen.
And I think tangentially related to that comment, when we talk about renewable energy in our community, Lake County is the farthest right-leaning county in the state. The audience that we're speaking to here We're going to highlight the different benefits of renewable energy, and a lot of those are really the economic benefits here. Does it make sense for your pocketbook? Does it bulk up your balance sheet? Whereas if we're working with maybe, a more environmentally focused community, we're going to hit more on the environmental and sustainability benefits of renewable energy. So we certainly tailor the conversation to our audience and really do our due diligence on our work to know who we're speaking to and how to speak to them in their terms.
And I think we try not to get into multimedia, what you hear on that. We try to use peer-reviewed science more than anything, and not just what you hear on, or see on YouTube or some other program,
Using objective data to make informed decisions.
Sure. Yeah. That's all respectable. Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of thinking about sitting down and having a conversation, a respectful conversation, reminds me of a similar thing. I was talking with one of OMSI's partners, the High Desert Partnership over in your neighbor, Harney County. Mm-hmm. And they were mentioning the same thing, getting folks together at a table and over a meal or over something where folks can actually sit down and talk for a while and like you were saying, get off of the short bits of media or whatever, and having conversations with neighbors to move forward. It reminds me a lot of what they were telling me. And speaking of which, now that comes to me, there's a question that relates to this. It says, are there cross-county collaboratives or larger collaboratives that share similar values as LCRI? And have y'all found ways to amplify messages or like each other's messages and goals, like across the state or with some state leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, since the release of this film, I also want to just give kudos to the director, James Parker, for his great work. He made us look really, really good in that film. So it's not us. He made us look good. But that's really afforded us the opportunity to start building those relationships with other entities across the state doing similar work. You have guys like Wallowa Resources. You have like Y East RC&D, Sustainable Northwest, Verde. There's various entities across the state that we're partnering with and working with to broaden our impact and our scope. And specifically speaking about the Lakeview Stewardship Group, one of the efforts that I kind of undertook when I transitioned into this position was working with the collaborative to expand our geographic scope. So we're not just focused in Lake County anymore. We're focused in Lake and Klamath counties on the entire Fremont, Wainema National Forest. And with that, a partnership with another entity called the Klamath Lake Forest Health Partnership, whose focus is cross-boundary restoration. So we're really leveraging existing efforts, and by building those relationships, you really do leverage the collective efforts collective strengths of those groups and mitigate the collective weaknesses. So it's a very, very effective strategy.
And then organizations like Sustainable Northwest will often bring a bunch of us groups that are similar together to discuss things too. Mm-hmm. And they do that often.
Yep.
Great. There's another question, maybe that is kind of like an extension of that. So y'all just, you both mentioned a couple different organizations. This question says, how can people get more information about these issues in rural Oregon? Is there a place that folks can go out to find out more information, or even how to find out how to get active in some way?
Potentially a good place to start is by looking maybe at environmental focused nonprofit groups by county, or, watershed councils. A lot of times you have also state and federal agency groups involved in these collaborative decision-making processes. So they may be a good resource to go to kind of learn more about what is going on and what opportunities there are to get involved. And, specifically speaking for the Forest Collaborative, community participation is encouraged. The community is part of the collaborative, and their say, holds weight in those conversations. It's a very important part of the equation.
And all the organizations do have our own websites, and Sustainable Northwest will have multiple of connections also on theirs. Mm-hmm. So there's, those avenues too.
Great. There's a couple more questions left. Yeah, I think I see just two more questions. So, and they're both kind of sort of random, but let's see. One, it was mentioned before, cross-laminated timber. And this person says, I've heard just a small bit about cross-laminated timber. What actually is it? And is it produced and manufactured in Oregon? And does it support rural economies?
Yes, yes, and yes. So actually the degree I got in college was renewable materials and wood science and engineering. So that was the profession that I switched from. So cross-laminated timber is essentially taking, 1x4s or 2x4s and gluing them together on multiple layers. And this allows you to have components that, could be 5 feet wide and 2 feet tall that can be used for large, like load-bearing structural applications. For example, building multi-story buildings like Jim was talking about. And you can build the individual pieces of these cross-laminated timber components out of like residual and small diameter timbers and trees. And that's a lot of what you want to take out of the forest when you're doing restoration projects to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire. So, you're managing the forest in a way that improves the ecosystem health, reduces catastrophic wildfire risk, and then captures that carbon and stores it in the wood through the use as a building component. And you're offsetting the use of concrete and steel.
Yeah, and some people might say wood, fire, that's bad. There's no air in the structure. It is actually a pretty good fire. I mean, it can burn, don't get me wrong, I'm not mentioning that, but the fact that there's no air and it's glued big wood together, it's actually got some pretty good fire resistance to it.
It's substantially more fire resistant than concrete and steel, where concrete and steel will fail instantaneously and catastrophically. Cross-laminated timber will fail at a rate that you can calculate, and it's much slower. So you essentially have far more time to get out of a burning building. And then to answer the other part of that question, yes, it's being manufactured in Oregon. D.R. Johnson, that's a mill. They're kind of the leader in CLT manufacturing. And the last I heard, they were back ordered out like 3 or 4 years, but it was used in the new PV Hall at Oregon State University. That was all cross-laminated timber. Really cool building, really cool example. But it's catching on, and it's been used more in a global economy than it has in Oregon, but it is catching on.
And it's climate change. I've got a scientific paper by Dr. Chad Oliver and Dr. Bruce Lipke and Dr. James McCarter. And they were at the University of Washington. Chad's now the Dean of Sustainable Forestry at Yale. And that paper outlines the carbon benefits over steel and concrete. And I do want to point out, I always also look at what jobs are we changing out. And we can use some of the same people that build buildings with steel and concrete in building cross-laminated timber buildings, crane operators, etc. So I always like to think about that too. The people that we impact when we say this is worse or better than something else,
Just employment transition for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. Yeah. That's a great thing to keep in mind as one of the stakeholders for sure is the jobs and the people doing the work for sure. And I guess, is that something, this is just a question for me, I'm curious, is that something like I could purchase, or if I'm working with a contractor, is that something I can request? Like I want to work with cross-laminated timber. What can you tell me about that? Like, how would I, as a consumer, find that?
Yeah, you can work with a contractor. It's used in residential applications. Like oftentimes if you see like a vaulted ceiling that has an exposed like beam and it has all those little lines through it, like that's an example of cross-laminated timber technology. So it's available to the consumer, and a contractor should be able to help you identify this. I don't think it's something you can go to the Home Depot and buy. I'm not sure. There's not a Home Depot in Lakeview. I haven't been to one in years, but it is pretty widely available, I would say. And it's continuing to become more available as well. Excellent.
Okay, well, let's see. There's just one more question. Save the best for last. It's about cow burps. So this person, it says, I've heard that seaweed helps reduce cow burps. Have y'all heard this? Or do you know of ranchers that have introduced seaweed to cattle feed?
So I don't know about seaweed specifically. I know a potential feed additive that's been looked at that reduces that methane production in cows' stomachs would be biochar. Biochar is something that's been looked at that has substantial benefits. There's also a feed additive that was developed. I think it's over in Europe somewhere. That they've started feeding in with their cattle over there that reduces methane production by over 30%. But I think it's important to remember the economic feasibility of solutions like that. You know, it may be tough for a rancher who's already having a hard time making ends meet to really, you know, make a serious effort to reduce methane emissions from cow burps, right? Unless you put structures in place to help incentivize that, perhaps, where, you know, maybe if you're feeding an additive, you could generate some sort of credit for that would help you recoup your cost for that additional feed. I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah.
And if the science is still what it was before I retired, that is not one of the extensive causes of climate change. It's taking stuff that was buried in the earth for billions of years, millions of years, and putting it in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
That's good.
And that's what you were differentiating between abiotic and biotic sources,
right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I bet that, you know, that was, you know, helpful for me to hear. I'm sure it was helpful for a lot of the viewers to hear the difference there. Well, that's all the questions I have here. Is there anything else you want to share before we sign off?
We really appreciate the opportunity to come speak today. And, you know, we are a small local nonprofit, and if you feel inclined to give a donation, you can do that through our website at lcri.org. And every dollar helps, and we really appreciate any support that we can get.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure. And doing it through this technology, for an old guy, this is a new experience for me. So.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here, Nick and Jim. We do really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I guess the nice thing about this technology is that we're able to do it so far away, and being able to connect with y'all. So thanks for being here. We do appreciate it. And everyone else out there watching virtually, we are now out of time. Hopefully you got your questions answered. And if you want to rewatch their lecture, you can follow the link on OMSI's Facebook to rewatch the lecture. And also, you can follow us on social media for updates and future events that are happening at OMSI. As this year goes on, we're able to open up more and more and do more. So continue to find out about us and on omsi.edu. And also, just one last thing is the last virtual science pub will be happening in about 4 weeks on Tuesday, August 3rd. There's a lecture from Skylar Tibbetts, founder and co-director of the MIT Self-Assembly Lab. Skylar will be presenting insights into the emerging materials revolution. And once again, thanks to our partner, Celestream, for helping to make tonight's event possible. We really appreciate you. All right, everyone. Have a good night. Thanks for joining. Bye.